Okay, let's see if we can get headed in the right direction. On this one right here, how do you get from one term to the next term? You add 2, okay? So add 2. So how did you figure out you needed to add 2? I mean, it kind of seems like a silly question, but how do you know from this one to this one you add 2? 11 plus 2 is 13, okay? Or if we worked backwards, and this is important, everybody listen please. Or if we worked backwards, you could say, if I take a term and subtract the one before it, I get 2. So the difference between these two terms is 2. That's a very short way of writing what's going on here. The difference between any two consecutive terms is 2. Does that make sense? So again, the word right there is difference. So the difference between any two consecutive terms is 2. I'll write it this way. Any two terms is 2. Yeah, any two consecutive, thanks. So how do you get from the first term to the second term? I mean, like, how do you take the first term to produce a 7 out of the second term? What's that? You add 2. So I'm going to take the first term, 5, and I'm going to add 2, and I end up with 7, right? Okay, that's the second term. The first one was 5, right? Okay, how do I get the third term? What do I add? I add 4, right? So I'm going to take the first term and I have to add, remember, everything has to start from the first term. So I'm going to take the first term and I'm going to add 4, or let me write it this way. Is that okay? And I get 9. Okay, would you write down the one for the fourth term? What am I going to start with? 5 plus, not 2 times 2 times 2, because that would be 8. 3 times 2, right? And that would be the 11 that I want. Okay, I want you to notice something. To get the second term, you take the first term and you add 1 difference, 1, 2. To get the third term, we take the first term when we add 2 2s. To get the fourth term, we take the first term when we add 3 2s. So what if I want the fifth term? Add 4 2s. And that works, doesn't it? Pardon me. So what if I said the difference is 2? If I say the difference is 2 right here, there's that 2 that appears in every one of these. What's the 5? It's the first term, isn't it? So if I said a sub n equals something, what's the first thing I write? 5. Plus what? Should I do n times 2? No, what should I do? Okay, 2 times n minus 1, or I'm going to do n minus 1 times 2. Now, to double check and make sure that this actually works, let's see if it works on one of the ones we already have. Let's put a 3 right here. So I want the third term. If I want the third term, that's going to be 5 plus 3 minus 1 times 2. And does that produce the third term? It does. Everybody in good shape there? Okay, the key to figuring this out is to recognize that needs to be the first term, and this needs to be the difference. So I'm going to call this D, and because we could write this as a sub 1 if we want, or you could just write a. Sometimes books will just use a. Everybody good there? Okay. I'm hoping you can use that to figure out a formula for C right down below it. Okay, take a look at this one right here. How do you go from one term to the next term? Okay, you times by 2. Okay? So here we said the difference between any two consecutive terms is 2. How could we do this using the word ratio? Ratio between any two consecutive terms is 1/2. If you go this way, if you do 5 divided by 10, you get 1/2. Okay, we want it to be 2, because aren't we doubling every time? So instead of doing 5 divided by 10, what could you do? 10 divided by 5. So we're going to say this. Ratio of any term divided by the one before is 2. And then we're going to run through and do something very similar to what we did over here. Only on this problem, it was addition that we used to get from one to the next. What is it on this one? How do I go from one to the next? Multiplication, right? You double it. You times it by 2. You times it by something is what we're after. Okay? Whether it gets bigger or smaller, we're timesing by something if it's got the same ratio. Okay? So the first term is 5 again. How do I do the second term from the first term? 5 times 2. How do I do the third term? I've got a times by 2 and times by 2 again, so the easiest way to write that is 2 squared, right? Times by 2, times by 2, times by 2. So if I'm starting at the first term and I want to get to the fourth term, I've got a times by 2, times by 2, times by 2. So I start at the first term. How many 2's do I have to multiply by? 3. So what's the formula for the fifth one? 5 times 2 to the fourth. So what's a formula for the nth one? 5 times 2 to the n minus 1. Notice how that n minus 1 crops up again. So does that formula work? It does. You can check it. It will work. Now what I'd like you to do is get the homework done for 9-1. And I'd like you to see if you can come up with this right here. See if you can come up with formulas for those two guys right there. And I copied this off before I thought of to put this down. Okay. These are called arithmetic and geometric sequences. Arithmetic and geometric sequences. This is what 9-2 is about, and this one is what 9-3 is about. Can you guess which one's arithmetic and which one's geometric? Which one do you think is arithmetic? The addition one, okay? And the one that's geometric is the one with multiplication, okay? All right, now, told you I'd show you how to do this on the calculator, right? You have problem number 31 to do. I'm going to do problem number 32. So problem number 32 says this. A sub n equals 2 minus 4 over n. And it says, have your calculator graph this for you. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. And if you would follow along, please. Go ahead and turn on your calculator. Go to the y equals menu. And we're literally just going to type this in. Only the problem is the calculator won't graph things with n's in it. It will graph on an xy plane. So we want to put it in terms of x's. So I'm going to put 2 minus 4 divided by x. Any questions? Okay. then hit window. Okay, n is the number we plug in, but we're plugging in x's. Do I need to plug in numbers like 31 or negative 17 or anything like that? What number do I want to start with? What's the first number I plug in to make a sequence? I plug in a 1. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with 0, and we're probably not going to have to plug in more than 10 of them. Here's the hard part. I really don't know how big these numbers are unless I've got a good sense of it. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do from negative 5 to positive 5. And if the window happens to not be big enough, I'll fix it. So I'm going to hit graph. You should get something like that. And then here's what we're going to do. Hit trace and type in a 1. What do you get when you plug in a 1? A negative 2. Then plug in a 2. Then plug in a 3. Okay, so 2/3. Then plug in a 4. Then plug in a 5, and so forth. So the graph of the function is exactly the same as the graph of the sequence, but the sequence is only this point here, this point here, this point here. It only matches up right at integer values. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. The other secrets of what your calculator will do with sequences and series, we'll hold those for another time. Okay, but that's how you can graph it and take a look at it. Okay. If you want to add things up like we did before, like we did 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10, let me just type it in. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Please have these done tomorrow and think about what we talked about today, because that's going to make the next section or two a heck of a lot easier. Okay, have a great day.